History Secrets.
The history of ancient civilizations raises a central question about how human societies function. How do you control large populations? When small communities transform into complex societies, a fundamental problem emerges. Social coordination, political order, collective stability. The first great civilizations of the world faced exactly this challenge, and each of them developed different solutions to organize millions of people under a single system. Among the earliest complex societies in history are four fundamental civilizations: ancient China, the Indus Valley Civilization, Mesopotamia, and Egypt. Each of them found a distinct path to solve the problem of social control. In China, for example, the solution was bureaucracy, a highly structured administrative system based on exams and meritocratic selection. For centuries, Chinese families dedicated enormous effort to prepare their children for imperial exams. Passing these exams meant entering the civil service and becoming part of the state's administrative machine. This system created social stability because it channeled the ambition of families toward an institutionalized objective: serving the state. In the Indus Valley Civilization, the solution appears to have been different. There, social organization was deeply linked to religion, a religion that, according to some interpretations, emphasized values of harmony, peace, and equality. This spiritual tradition eventually influenced later religious currents in South Asia, including elements that would later appear in Buddhism. In Mesopotamia, however, the geographic context created a very different reality. Unlike China, the region had few natural barriers, no major mountains or oceans to guarantee protection. This made the region extremely vulnerable to invasions, and, as a result, constant wars became a central part of political organization. Frequent conflicts helped keep society mobilized, creating an environment where war functioned as a mechanism of social cohesion. But perhaps the most unique model emerged in ancient Egypt. There, political stability was built around a central figure: the pharaoh. In Egyptian religious belief, the pharaoh was not merely a ruler. He was considered a divine manifestation, a living embodiment of sacred forces that maintained the order of the world. This belief had profound consequences, because the authority of the pharaoh did not depend solely on military force. It was tied to the very spiritual structure of society. But this also created a problem. If the pharaoh was human, his life was constantly at risk. Conspiracies, palace intrigues, succession disputes. Ruling an empire required more than religious legitimacy. It required specific psychological skills. This raises an intriguing question. What truly defines a great leader in history? We are often taught that leadership requires classical virtues: wisdom, empathy, responsibility, the ability to inspire trust. These qualities are certainly important in many areas of life, but some historical analyses suggest that leaders operating in highly competitive environments develop another set of characteristics. Among them, three abilities frequently appear in analyses of political behavior. The first is unpredictability. When a leader is difficult to predict, opponents find it harder to anticipate their decisions. The second is a high tolerance for stress. Leaders often face enormous pressure, crises, conflicts, constant political attacks. Maintaining emotional stability in this environment can be a decisive factor for political survival. The third characteristic mentioned by some analysts is emotional detachment. the ability to make hard decisions without being paralyzed by immediate feelings. These three characteristics can be summarized in a specific psychological concept: dissociation. In psychology, dissociation refers to a mental state in which a person partially distances themselves from their own emotions or experiences, as if observing the situation from the outside. In environments of extreme pressure, this ability can allow a leader to continue making rational decisions, even under highly stressful circumstances. Some historical interpretations suggest that certain systems of power may have attempted to develop or stimulate this type of mental state in their rulers, especially in contexts where political power was surrounded by intrigue and constant threats. In ancient Egypt, for example, complex mythologies played a central role in the symbolic formation of royal authority. Stories involving gods such as Ra, Osiris, and Horus structured the Egyptian view of power and cosmic order. These myths were not merely stories. They formed the basis of rituals, symbols, and narratives that legitimized the power of the pharaoh. In many ancient cultures, rituals and mythologies functioned as instruments of psychological formation, creating identities, establishing social roles, and reinforcing political authority. Regardless of how exactly these processes functioned, one thing seems clear: great systems of power have always sought to shape the behavior and mindset of their leaders. Because governing complex societies requires much more than formal authority. It requires emotional control, strategic capacity, and, often, immense psychological resilience. That may be why history is filled with leaders whose personalities seem difficult to understand. Figures capable of alternating between contradictory behaviors, extreme calm in moments of crisis, or unexpected decisions that surprise allies and adversaries. These characteristics raise an interesting reflection. To what extent does individual psychology influence the fate of societies? And to what extent do political systems shape the people who reach power? This question remains open, but history suggests that understanding the behavior of leaders can be just as important as understanding the events that shape the world. When we analyze more deeply the power structures of ancient civilizations, something curious becomes clear. Power rarely depends only on military strength or economic wealth. It also depends on psychological control, control of beliefs, control of perceptions, control of identity. In ancient Egypt, for example, mythology played a much deeper role than simply explaining the world. It functioned as a symbolic system of power. Among the main Egyptian gods were three central figures: Ra, Osiris, and Horus. Ra was the sun god, the force that brought life to the universe. Every night, according to the myth, he descended into the underworld to face a colossal serpent that tried to devour the sun. And every night he had to defeat this enemy to ensure the birth of a new day. Osiris, in turn, represented civilization, the just pharaoh, the ruler who established order and prosperity. But his story was marked by tragedy. His own brother, Set, conspired against him, deceived him, and destroyed him. According to the myth, Osiris was killed, and his body was torn apart, scattered across the world. But his wife, Isis, gathered each fragment, reconstructing her husband's body. From this process, Horus was born, the son who would inherit the mission of restoring the throne, and confront Set to reclaim rightful power. At first glance, this story may seem like just a mythological narrative, a set of religious legends, but some interpretations suggest that these myths had a much deeper function. They could function as symbolic models of identity, archetypes that shaped the worldview of ruling elites. Each figure represented a specific type of psychological role. Ra represented the divine hero, the force that fights against chaos. Osiris represented the unjustly victimized figure, the ruler who suffers betrayal and destruction. And Horus represented the avenger, the heir who restores order. Some analyses suggest that these figures could function as symbolic identities that shaped the behavior of the pharaoh, mental roles that the ruler needed to embody in different moments. In certain situations, the pharaoh needed to act as Arakir, the defender of order against chaos. In other circumstances, he could assume the role of Osiris, the figure who suffers, who endures, who symbolizes sacrifice. And in moments of political or military conflict, the identity of Horus could emerge, the ruler who reclaims power and defeats his enemies. This symbolic multiplicity may have helped shape the mindset of rulers, allowing them to operate across different psychological roles. When we observe leaders throughout history, something similar seems to occur. Many of them display highly complex personalities, capable of rapidly shifting between different behavioral styles. In moments of crisis, they may act with calculated coldness. In other moments, they may mobilize heroic or symbolic narratives to inspire followers. This ability to shift between identities may be related to the psychological phenomenon known as dissociation. In modern psychology, dissociation does not necessarily mean disorder. It can occur in a mild and everyday way. All of us play different roles depending on the context. At home, we are one person. At work, another. Among friends, yet another. These roles are not necessarily false. They are part of social adaptation. But in environments of extreme power, this psychological flexibility can become much more intense, because leaders face pressures that most people will never experience. Decisions that affect millions, military conflicts, economic crises, constant threats. To survive in this environment, some leaders may develop a kind of emotional detachment, an ability to observe the situation as if they were outside of it. This detachment can allow for rapid decision-making, but it can also generate behaviors that seem incomprehensible to external observers. Throughout history, many rulers have been described as unpredictable, charismatic at certain moments, extremely cold in others. This duality raises a fascinating question. Does power transform the psychology of individuals, or are certain psychological profiles more likely to reach positions of power? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere between these two possibilities. Because complex systems of power do not only select certain types of individuals, they also shape those who reach the top. Over time, leaders learn to navigate environments of intense competition and develop mental strategies to deal with constant risk. This helps explain why history often presents leaders whose personalities seem contradictory, human, but at the same time, distant. Perhaps, ultimately, understanding power requires understanding something even deeper, the very nature of the human mind. When we begin to observe these psychological structures more closely, an even deeper question emerges. If leaders can be shaped by symbolic systems, rituals, and narratives, to what extent can the human mind be influenced? This question appears repeatedly throughout history. Religions, initiation rituals, military training, ideological programs. All of these systems seek to shape human behavior. In the case of ancient civilizations, many of these processes were linked to intense rituals, symbolic experiences, situations that provoked strong emotional impact. In many ancient cultures, initiation rituals involved moments of fear, isolation, or physical trials. These experiences created extremely powerful memories, and often deeply altered the individual's sense of identity. Some anthropologists describe this process as a form of symbolic reconstruction of personality. The individual undergoes a threshold experience and emerges from it with a new social identity. In ancient Egypt, certain rituals connected to mythology and royal authority may have played this type of symbolic role, especially within political and religious elites. These rituals reinforced the idea that the pharaoh was not just an ordinary ruler. He represented divine forces, cosmic roles, identities associated with the gods of Egyptian tradition. This perspective strengthened his authority in the eyes of the population, but it also helped shape his own perception of identity. When a person spends years being treated as a divine figure, their own mind may begin to internalize that role, and this can profoundly alter the way they think and act. At the same time, systems of power often use symbols and narratives to reinforce the loyalty of elites, oaths, secrets, restricted societies. These mechanisms create networks of trust and dependence, fundamental elements for maintaining the stability of complex political regimes. In many periods of history, political alliances functioned almost like discrete societies, where information, trust, and strategy were shared only among selected members. This dynamic aligns with concepts studied in game theory, a field that analyzes how individuals make strategic decisions in competitive environments. In systems where many actors compete for power simultaneously, alliances become essential. But these alliances can also be fragile. They change quickly. They are formed and dissolved as interests evolve. In this kind of environment, unpredictability can become a strategic advantage. If opponents cannot anticipate your decisions, it becomes much harder to build strategies against you. This logic appears repeatedly in international politics. Some leaders deliberately cultivate an image of unpredictability, creating uncertainty among both allies and adversaries. At the same time, high-level politics demands enormous psychological resilience. Constant criticism, political attacks, public pressure, unexpected crises. The ability to remain functional under this level of pressure is a common trait among leaders who stay in power for long periods. But there is also a darker side to this dynamic, when leaders become excessively detached from the human consequences of their decisions. Wars, sanctions, economic policies, all of these decisions can affect millions of people, and making them often requires a significant degree of emotional detachment. This reality raises an uncomfortable reflection. Does the global political system favor colder, more calculating personalities? Or does the structure of power itself transform those who reach the top? History does not offer a simple answer, but it shows that highly competitive environments tend to select individuals capable of handling extreme pressure. And often, this means developing a different relationship with emotions such as fear, guilt, or compassion. Still, understanding these dynamics does not mean accepting them as inevitable. On the contrary, it means recognizing how systems of power function. Because only by understanding these structures is it possible to reflect on ways to build more balanced political systems. Systems where leadership is not defined only by strategic survival, but also by collective responsibility. This reflection remains open, just as the broader question of power remains open. Who truly controls the destiny of societies? Extraordinary individuals, or the invisible structures that shape their decisions? Perhaps the answer lies in the interaction between both, between the human mind and the systems of power it creates. If we look at this entire discussion from a historical perspective, an interesting conclusion begins to emerge. Power has never been just a matter of force. It has always been connected to the human mind, to how we perceive the world, to how we interpret reality. Ancient civilizations understood this very early on. They realized that controlling an empire did not mean only controlling territories. It meant controlling narratives, symbols, collective experiences. In ancient Egypt, for example, rituals and mythologies were not merely religious traditions. They helped structure the entire social order, reinforcing the authority of the pharaoh and consolidating the stability of the political system. By participating in these rituals, individuals were not just observing sacred stories, they were experiencing them, and this created a deep emotional connection with the structure of power. This type of mechanism appears in many societies: political ceremonies, national symbols, shared historical narratives. All of these elements help build collective identities, and collective identities are fundamental for maintaining social cohesion. But when we turn our attention to the leaders themselves, we notice something even more intriguing. Leadership often requires an unusual psychological capacity. Dealing with decisions that affect millions of people, enduring constant pressure, operating in environments where alliances shift rapidly. In such contexts, the human mind needs to develop mechanisms of adaptation, psychological strategies that allow individuals to face extreme situations. Among these mechanisms, emotional detachment frequently appears, an ability to observe events without being completely consumed by them. This ability can be useful to maintain clarity in moments of crisis, but it can also create a paradox. Because leaders who become too detached from the human consequences of their decisions may lose touch with the everyday reality of the population. This tension has accompanied politics for thousands of years, between strategic rationality and moral responsibility. Throughout history, some leaders have managed to balance these two dimensions. Others have been consumed by power itself. And perhaps this is one of the greatest lessons that history offers us. Power is not only an external force, it is also a psychological force. It transforms institutions, transforms societies, and often deeply transforms those who exercise it. That is why understanding power requires looking beyond political or military decisions. It requires observing the invisible structures that shape human behavior. Narratives, beliefs, rituals, experiences that form identities. These elements influence both rulers and the ruled, and help explain why certain power structures endure for centuries, while others collapse rapidly. Perhaps the real question is not only who governs, but how societies construct the systems that define who governs. Because in the end, leaders emerge within specific social structures, and those structures profoundly shape their choices. Thus, understanding power also means understanding the stories we tell about it, the narratives that legitimize authority, the symbols that sustain social order. And perhaps it is precisely at this intersection between mind, culture, and power that one of the greatest mysteries of human history lies. How entire societies manage to organize millions of people, following symbols, ideas, and leaders who represent those ideas. Fully answering this question may be impossible, but exploring it helps us better understand the world we live in, and the systems of power that continue to shape our future. Because, in the end, the history of power is also the history of the human mind. The past does not disappear. It remains recorded in ancient monuments, in forgotten texts, and in stories that have crossed centuries. Each discovery reveals a new enigma, and each enigma brings us closer to the truth. You are watching History Secrets. Subscribe and continue investigating the hidden secrets of history. Because some secrets of history are still waiting to be revealed.